John Conlid, William Witsoever, Thomas Jones, Francis LaConfa, Joseph Bussell, Abraham Wilhelm, James Corser, Peter Peterson, John Smith, Giuseppe Laleso, William Cousins, Louis DuPont, Andrew Karuski, Richard Henry, and so the list went on, with only the sick gunner and one Isaac Wilson not answering, until it ended with the newcomers and the boys, 89 souls counting officers, men, boys, and Marines. Then began the reading of the Articles of War, a ceremony that often accompanied divine service, and that was so closely associated with it in most minds that the faces of the crew assumed a look of devout blankness at the words, for the better regulating at His Majesty's navies, ships of war and forces by sea, whereon under the good providence of God the wealth, safety, and strength of His kingdom chiefly depend. Be it enacted by the King's most excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Lords spiritual and temporal and commons in this present Parliament assembled, and by the authority of the same, that from and after the 25th day of December, 1749, the articles and orders hereinafter following, as well as in time of peace as in time of war, shall be duly observed and put in execution, in manner hereinafter mentioned, an expression that they retain throughout, unmoved by all flag officers, and all persons in or belonging to His Majesty's ships or vessels of war, being guilty of profane oaths, cursings, execrations, drunkenness, uncleanliness, or other scandalous actions, shall incur such punishment as a court-martial shall think fit to impose, or by the echoing repetition of shall suffer death. Every flag officer, captain, and commander in the fleet who shall not encourage the inferior officers and men to fight courageously shall suffer death. If any person in the fleet shall treacherously or cowardly yield or cry for quarter, being convicted thereof by the sentence of a court-martial, shall suffer death. Every person who through cowardice shall in time of action withdraw or keep back shall suffer death. Every person who through cowardice, negligence, or disaffection shall forbear to pursue an enemy, pirate, or rebel, beaten or flying, shall suffer death. If any officer, mariner, soldier, or other person in the fleet shall strike any of his superior officers, draw or offer to draw, or lift up any weapon, shall suffer death. If any person in the fleet shall commit the unnatural and detestable sin of buggery or sodomy with man or beast, he shall be punished with death. Death rang through and through the articles, and even where the words were utterly incomprehensible, the death had a fine comminatory Leviticus ring, and the crew took a grave pleasure in it all. It was what they were used to. It was what they heard the first Sunday in every month, and upon all extraordinary occasions such as this. They found it comfortable to their spirits, and when the watch below was dismissed, the men looked far more settled. "Very well," said Jack, looking around. "Make signal 23 with 2 guns to leeward. Mr. Marshal, we will set the main and fore staysail, and as soon as you see that Pink coming up with the rest of the convoy, set the royals. Mr. Watt, let the sailmaker and his party get to work on the square mainsail directly, and send the new hands aft one by one. Where's my clerk? Mr. Dillon, let us knock these watch bills into some kind of a shape. Dr. Maturin, allow me to present my officers." This was the first time Stephen and James had come face to face in the Sophie, but Stephen had seen that flaming red queue with its black ribbon, and he was largely prepared. Even so, the shock of recognition was so great that his face automatically took on a look of veiled aggression and of the coldest reserve. For James Dillon, the shock was far greater. In the hurry and business of the preceding 24 hours, he had not chanced to hear the new surgeon's name, but apart from a slight change of color, he betrayed no particular emotion. "I wonder," said Jack to Stephen, when the introductions were over, "whether it would amuse you to look over the soup while Mr. Dillon and I attend to this business, or whether you would prefer to be in the cabin. Nothing would give me greater pleasure than to look over the ship, I am sure, said Stephen. A very elegant complexity of his voice trailed off. Mr. Mowat, be so good as to show Dr. Matarin everything he would like to see. Carry him into the main top. It affords quite a visto. You do not mind a little height, my dear sir? Oh, no, said Stephen, looking vaguely about him. I do not mind it. James Mowat was a tubular young man, getting on for 20. He was dressed in an old sailcloth trousers and a striped gurney shirt, a knitted garment that gave him very much the look of a caterpillar, and he had a marlin spike dangling round his neck, for he had meant to take a hand in the making of the new square mainsail. He looked attentively at Stephen to make out what kind of a man he was, and with that mixture of easy grace and friendly deference which comes naturally to so many sailors, he made his bow and sail. Well, sir, where do you choose to start? Shall we go into the top directly? You can see the whole run of the deck from there. The whole run of the deck amounted to some 10 yards aft and 16 forward, and it was perfectly visible from where they stood. But Stephen said, let us go up then, by all means. Lead the way, and I will imitate your motions as best I can. He watched thoughtfully while Mowat sprang into the rat lines, and then, his mind far away, slowly hoisted himself up after him. James Dillon and he had belonged to the United Irishmen, a society that at different times in the last 9 years had been an open public association calling for the emancipation of Presbyterians, Dissenters, and Catholics, and for a representative government of Ireland, a proscribed secret society, an armed body in open rebellion, and a defeated hunted remnant. The rising had been put down amidst the usual horrors, and in spite of the general pardon, the lives of the more important members were in danger. Many had been betrayed. Lord Edward Fitzgerald himself at the very outset, and many had withdrawn, distrusting even their own families, for the events had divided the society and the nation most terribly. Stephen Matarin was not afraid of any vulgar betrayal, nor was he afraid for his skin, because he did not value it, but he had to suffered from the incalculable tensions, rancor, and hatreds that arise from the failure of a rebellion, that he could not bear any further disappointment, any further hostile, recriminatory confrontation, any fresh example of a friend grown cold, or worse. There had always been very great disagreements within the association, and now in the ruins of it, it was impossible. Once daily contact had been lost to tell where any man stood. He was not afraid for his skin, not afraid for himself, but presently his climbing body, now halfway up the shrouds, let him know that for its own part it was in a state of rapidly increasing terror. 40 feet is no great height, but it seems far more lofty, aerial, and precarious when there is nothing but an insubstantial, yielding ladder of moving ropes underfoot. And when Stephen was 3 parts of the way up, cries of delay on deck showed that the staysails were set and their sheets hauled aft. They filled, and the Sophie heeled over another strake or two. This coincided with her leeward roll, and the rail passed slowly under Stephen's downward gaze, to be followed by the sea. A wide expanse of glittering water very far below and directly underneath. His grip on the rat lines tightened with a cataleptic strength, and his upward progress ceased. He remained there, spread-eagled, while the varying forces of gravity, centrifugal motion, irrational panic, and reasonable dread acted upon his motionless, tight, cramped person, now pressing him forward so that the checkered pattern of the shrouds and their crossing rat lines were imprinted on his front, and now plucking him backward so that he bellied out like a shirt hung up to dry. A form slid down the backstay to the left of him, hands closed gently round his ankles, and Mowat's cheerful young voice said, "Now, sir, on the roll, clap on to the shrouds, the uprights, and look upwards. Here we go." His right foot was firmly moved up to the next rat line. His left followed it. And after one more hideous swinging backward lunge in which he closed his eyes and stopped breathing, the lubber's hull received its second visitor of the day. Mowat had darted round by the futtock shrouds and was there in the top to haul him through. "This is the main top, sir," said Mowat, affecting not to notice Stephen's haggard look. "The other one over there is the foretop, of course." "I am very sensible of your kindness in helping me up," said Stephen. "Thank you." "Oh, sir," cried Mowat, "I beg, and that's the main staysail they just set below us, and that's the forestaysail for'ard. You'll never see one but on a man-o'-war. Those triangles, why are they called staysails?" asked Stephen, speaking somewhat at random. "Why, sir, because they are rigged on the stays, slide along them like curtains by those rings. We call them hanks at sea. We used to have grommets, but we rigged hanks when we were laying off cadas last year, and they answer much better. The stays are those thick ropes that run sloping down straight for'ard, and their function is to extend these sails, I see." "Well, sir, they do extend them, to be sure, but what they are really for is to hold up the mast, to stay them for'ard, to prevent them falling backwards when she pitches." "The masts need support then?" asked Stephen, stepping cautiously across the platform and patting the squared top of the lower mast and the rounded foot of the topmast. Two stout parallel columns, close on 3 feet of wood between them, counting the gap. "I should scarcely have thought it."